Podcast Talk.
Learn English naturally.
It's time to transform your life. Have you ever felt like you're waiting for the right moment to finally change something in your life? Maybe you tell yourself you'll start when you feel more confident, when things calm down, or when you have more time. But the truth is that perfect moment rarely arrives. Life keeps moving, and waiting often turns into a habit. So, what if change isn't about finding the right time, but about deciding that now is enough? Today, we're talking about why the moment to transform your life is closer than you think, and how small shifts can lead to big changes.
I think one of the biggest misconceptions about change is that it has to be dramatic. People imagine quitting everything, starting over, or making huge decisions overnight. But in reality, most meaningful change happens quietly, through small daily choices that don't look impressive at first. I remember when I decided to improve my health, I didn't suddenly become a different person. I had just started walking every morning for 10 minutes. It felt insignificant, but over time it changed how I felt, how I thought, and even how I approached other areas of my life. So maybe the real question isn't, how do I change everything? But, what small step can I take today? Because small steps create momentum, and momentum creates transformation.
That's such an important point because waiting for motivation is something many people struggle with. They think they need to feel ready before they begin, but often readiness comes after you start, not before. I've noticed that when people take even the smallest action, their mindset begins to shift. They start seeing themselves as someone who moves forward instead of someone who waits. And that identity change is powerful. Once you believe you're capable of change, you naturally begin making better decisions without forcing yourself. It's like your brain starts working with you instead of against you. So instead of asking, do I feel ready? Try asking, am I willing to try? That simple shift can open so many doors.
Another thing that people often don't realize is how much fear disguises itself as logic. We tell ourselves we're being realistic, but sometimes we're just protecting ourselves from discomfort. Change always involves uncertainty, and uncertainty can feel uncomfortable, even when the outcome is positive. But when you look back at the moments that shaped your life the most, they were probably moments when you took a risk or stepped outside your comfort zone. Growth rarely feels comfortable in the moment, but it almost always feels worth it later. So maybe instead of avoiding discomfort, we can start seeing it as a sign that we're moving in the right direction.
Something else that really changes the way people approach their lives is understanding that clarity doesn't come before action. It comes because of action. Many people wait until they figure everything out, but clarity is usually a result of trying, adjusting, and learning along the way. I remember talking to someone who kept saying they didn't know what they wanted to do with their career. But the truth was, they hadn't tried enough things yet. Once they started experimenting, even small experiences gave them direction. And that's how life works. Movement creates understanding. When you stay still, everything feels confusing. But when you take steps, even imperfect ones, your path starts to reveal itself naturally. So maybe the goal isn't to have a perfect plan, but to stay open to learning as you move forward.
That reminds me of how often we underestimate the power of consistency. People want quick results, but real transformation is usually slow and almost invisible at first. Think about learning a language. building a habit, or improving your mindset. The progress is subtle, but over time it becomes undeniable. I've seen this with people who commit to small routines, like reading for 10 minutes a day or taking time to reflect before bed. It doesn't look dramatic, but it creates stability and confidence. Consistency builds trust with yourself, and when you trust yourself, change feels less intimidating. It's not about doing everything perfectly. It's about showing up repeatedly even when progress feels slow.
And I think one of the most freeing realizations is that you don't have to become a completely different person to change your life. Sometimes it's simply about becoming more honest with yourself. When you start paying attention to what truly makes you feel energized or fulfilled, you begin making decisions that align with your values instead of expectations. That shift can feel subtle, but it changes everything. You stop chasing things that don't matter and start investing your time where it actually feels meaningful. And the more aligned your choices are with who you really are, the more natural and sustainable change becomes. Transformation isn't about forcing yourself, it's about understanding yourself.
There's also something powerful about accepting that change doesn't happen in a straight lane. People often expect constant progress, but real growth includes setbacks, pauses, and moments of doubt. Those moments don't mean you're failing, they mean you're learning. When you see challenges as part of the process instead of obstacles, you become more resilient. I've experienced times when things didn't go as planned, and at first it felt discouraging. But looking back, those moments taught me more than any easy success ever did. Growth isn't about avoiding mistakes, it's about learning how to move forward despite them. And on the hand, that perspective makes the journey much less stressful.
I think one of the biggest turning points for many people is realizing that change doesn't start with confidence. It starts with a decision. Confidence is something that grows after you begin, not before. So many people believe they need to feel ready, motivated, or inspired before they take action, but that's rarely how it works in real life. Most of the time, you begin while feeling uncertain, and the confidence comes from seeing yourself move forward anyway. I remember a time when I was afraid to start something new because I thought I wasn't prepared enough. But once I took the first small step, I realized that progress creates energy. The more you move, the more capable you start to feel. And that's why waiting for confidence can keep people stuck for years. When instead, simply choosing to start, even imperfectly, creates momentum. Change isn't about feeling fearless, it's about acting despite the fear and letting experience reshape how you see yourself.
That's so true. Because when people look back on the moments that shaped their lives, they rarely say they felt completely ready. Usually they say they were nervous, unsure, or even scared, but they decided to move forward anyway. I remember when I changed careers, I spent months overthinking every possible outcome. I kept telling myself I needed more information, more certainty, more time. But eventually I realized that no amount of thinking was going to replace the experience of actually trying. Once I made the decision, things didn't become easier overnight, but I started learning faster because I was finally in motion. Sometimes we think thinking is progress, but real progress begins when we take action. And even if things don't go exactly as planned, you gain clarity, resilience, and experience that you could never get from staying still. That's what makes action so powerful. It teaches you in ways that thinking never can.
Another important part of transforming your life is learning to let go of the idea that everything has to be perfect before you move forward. Perfection can feel safe because it gives us a reason to delay. but in reality, it often keeps us stuck. When you allow yourself to take imperfect steps, you open the door to real growth. You learn faster because you're actually experiencing life instead of just planning it. I've noticed that people who are willing to start before they feel fully prepared often make progress much faster than those who wait for the perfect moment. Because growth isn't about having all the answers, it's about being willing to learn along the way. And once you accept that mistakes are part of the process, they stop feeling like failures and start feeling like feedback. That mindset alone can completely change how you approach challenges and opportunities.
I also think it's important to remember that changing your life doesn't always mean changing everything at once. Sometimes it simply means changing how you respond to situations, how you speak to yourself, or how you choose to spend your time each day. Small internal shifts can lead to powerful external changes over time. For example, choosing to replace negative self-talk with more supportive thoughts can gradually change your confidence and decision-making. I've seen people transform their entire outlook just by becoming more aware of their habits and making small adjustments. It doesn't look dramatic at first, but over months and years, it completely reshapes their lives. Change isn't always loud or visible. Sometimes it's quiet and steady. But that kind of change tends to be the most lasting because it's built on awareness and intention rather than pressure or urgency.
And another powerful shift happens when you stop focusing only on outcomes and start paying attention to the process itself. When people only focus on results, they often feel impatient or discouraged because progress can feel slow. But when you learn to appreciate the process, every small step feels meaningful. You start noticing growth in your mindset, your habits, and your confidence, even before the big results appear. I've learned that when you enjoy the process, you become more consistent, and consistency is what truly creates long-term change. Life isn't just about reaching goals, it's about who you become while moving toward them. And when you start seeing growth as a journey instead of a destination, everything begins to feel more balanced and less stressful.
There's also something incredibly powerful about surrounding yourself with environments that support the kind of life you want to build. Environment shapes behavior more than we often realize. When you spend time in spaces that inspire growth, whether that's through people, routines, or even the content you consume, you naturally start making better decisions without forcing yourself. I've experienced this personally. When I changed my daily environment, even small habits became easier because I was no longer fighting against distractions or negativity. Sometimes changing your environment can be more effective than trying to change your motivation, because when your surroundings support you, progress feels more natural and less exhausting. It's a reminder that you don't have to rely only on willpower. You can design your life in a way that supports your growth.
Something that often surprises people is how much their beliefs shape what they think is possible. If you believe change is difficult or unlikely, your brain naturally looks for evidence that supports that idea. But when you begin to believe that growth is possible, even small improvements start to feel meaningful. I've seen people completely change their direction simply by shifting how they see themselves. Instead of saying, "I'm not the kind of person who can do this," they begin saying, "I'm learning how to do this." That subtle difference changes how you approach challenges. Beliefs aren't fixed, they evolve through experience. And every small success, every step forward, reinforces the idea that change is possible. When you start seeing yourself as someone who grows instead of someone who stays the same, transformation becomes much more natural and sustainable.
And I think another important part of transforming your life is learning to be patient with yourself. We live in a world that celebrates quick results, but real growth often takes longer than we expect. When progress feels slow, it's easy to feel discouraged, but slow progress is still progress. Some of the strongest habits and most meaningful changes develop gradually because they're built on consistency rather than urgency. I've learned that patience allows you to stay committed even when results aren't immediately visible. It helps you keep going when motivation fades because you understand that growth isn't always obvious in the moment. When you treat yourself with patience instead of pressure, you create a healthier relationship with change. And that makes the journey much more sustainable.
And maybe the most powerful realization is that you don't have to wait for a completely new version of yourself to appear before you begin. Change happens because of the actions you take today, not because of some future version of you who feels more confident or prepared. When you take small steps now, you begin becoming that future version naturally. You build confidence through action, not through waiting. I've noticed that people who start before they feel ready often grow faster because they're learning in real time. They're not waiting for certainty. They're creating it through experience. Your future self isn't someone separate from you. It's simply who you become through the choices you make today. And every small decision moves you closer to that version of yourself.
I think what really changes everything is when people realize that transformation isn't a single decision. It's a series of small choices repeated over time. There isn't usually one dramatic moment that changes everything overnight. Instead, it's the daily decisions that quietly shape your direction. The way you spend your mornings, the conversations you have, the habits you build, and even the thoughts you repeat. All of these things slowly define your path. When you start paying attention to those small choices, you begin to understand how much control you actually have over your life. It's not about being perfect every day. It's about being intentional more often than not. And once you understand that progress is built through consistency, you stop feeling overwhelmed by the idea of change and start focusing on what you can do today.
And I think one of the most beautiful parts of personal growth is realizing that you're allowed to evolve. You don't have to stay the same just because it feels familiar. Life is constantly changing, and you're allowed to change with it. Sometimes people hold on to old versions of themselves because it feels safe, but growth often means letting go of what no longer fits. That can feel uncomfortable at first, but it also creates space for new opportunities and experiences. I've seen how powerful it is when someone finally allows themselves to grow without guilt or fear. They start making decisions that feel more aligned, more authentic, and more meaningful. And when you give yourself permission to evolve, life begins to feel more open, more flexible, and full of possibilities.
I think something people don't talk about enough is how change also requires compassion toward yourself. When you're trying to grow, it's easy to become overly critical and feel like you're not doing enough or moving fast enough. But real transformation doesn't happen through pressure. It happens through consistency and understanding. When you allow yourself to grow at your own pace, you create space for real progress instead of burnout. I've noticed that the people who sustain change the longest are the ones who learn to treat themselves with patience. They don't expect perfection, but they stay committed even when things feel slow. And that mindset creates resilience because instead of giving up when things get hard, they adjust and keep moving forward. Change becomes something supportive instead of something stressful, and that makes all the difference.
And when you look back over time, you start to see how those small decisions quietly reshape your life. It's rarely one big moment. It's the accumulation of choices, habits, and mindset shifts that gradually change how you feel and what you believe is possible. What once felt difficult begins to feel normal, and what once felt impossible begins to feel achievable. That's the beauty of growth. It happens so gradually that you sometimes don't notice it until you reflect on how far you've come. And I think that reflection is important because it reminds you that progress is happening even when it feels slow. It helps you appreciate the journey instead of only focusing on the destination. When you learn to see growth this way, you stop chasing change and start living it.
So, if this conversation reminded you that change doesn't have to be dramatic to be meaningful, then you're already moving in the right direction. Real transformation is built through small choices, patience, and the willingness to keep going even when progress feels quiet. If you enjoyed this episode and want more real conversations about mindset, growth, and living with intention, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. And we'd really love to hear from you. Tell us in the comments what topic you'd like us to talk about next or what kind of changes you're focusing on right now. Thank you for spending this time with us, and remember, the best time to move forward is always now. We'll see you in the next episode. See you.